But when you realise that isn't even binding on the caliph to do by their own religious view, that actually there's no need for a state to enforce religious law, it's not religiously mandatory, even in their own view, you start to realise that's just a political idea, then it's not even a religious idea. Similarly, when you look at things like, okay, their notion of the caliph, actually Muslims historically never had one single caliph. From the time of, the fourth caliph, they had a split within where modern-day Syria is and Iraq. And then subsequent to that, in the Umayyad dynasty, you had the Umayyads, Abdullah bin Zubair had his own caliphate and so on, and then the Spaniards had their own caliphate, and in Baghdad and Egypt, the Fatimids had their own caliphate, and the 800-year dynasty of the Safavids in Iran. And you just come to this realization, this idea of a single global caliphate historically never existed. And then you start to see, religiously speaking, people talk about lots of differences and multiple leaders and accepting that, and they're pragmatic. And then you realize, actually, this narrative that people like Al-Qaeda and Hizb ut-Tahrir say that we need a global state from Indonesia to Spain to... It's never existed in history. It's unrealistic, and then it's not religiously founded. But it's a gradual process. It's a gradual process of realization that the politics is absurd. The religious foundations for it are tenuous at best. And also something else I think happens before those two things click into place. You start to realize these ideas are actually fundamentally problematic on a human level. It's not immoral, it's amoral. It's not bad. It fundamentally doesn't recognize your human nature. One of the things that the Quran talks about is how it addressed the pagan Arabs at the time. One of the customs they used to have was they would bury their daughters if they had a daughter, because their daughters were seen as a burden. Very much like popular Indian culture at the moment still has aspects of this. And the Quran addressed how, one of the verses raised the question that when the وَإِذَا الْمَوْئِدَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنبٍ قُتِلَتْ, when the female, or the girl, when she asks, why was I slain? And this is it's a question that she's asking, why did you kill me? As this is something that will happen in the resurrection. And it poses this question because fundamentally all humans, whether you're pagan or Muslim or not, should fundamentally recognize killing someone for no reason is bad. And there are no moral justifications for killing a child. And so essentially human nature should recognize certain things as good and bad. Otherwise it makes no sense to condemn the things the Quran condemned, unless they assume a natural moral framework. And what you realize is this ideology fundamentally supersedes that and says, no, only the religious interpretation of our scholars and our thinkers for what should be the religion of Islam, when you should go to war, when you should not. Is suicide bombing acceptable? Yes, it is. Why? Because our interpretation says it's acceptable to undertake this action. Okay. Our religious interpretation says Israel is occupying our land, and therefore Israelis, men and women, are occupiers and at war with us. They're not civilians. And all of them, they do military service, so we can kill them all. So that's their political narrative by which they view religious scripture, by which they interpret the text. And it's only when that happened, and when I started to engage with them, say, something, your politics are absurd. This narrative is damaging to these causes, because you're getting these offshoots of crazy terrorists, whether it's Muhajirun, whether it's the Palestinian jihad, which were all offshoots of Hizb ut-Tahrir. Tamimi in Palestine, or Bakri Muhammad in Britain, all offshoots of Hizb ut-Tahrir, who ended up being radical terrorist groups. And you see this as part and parcel of the offshoot of this ideology. And you realize it's just bad for the world. It's actually, as much as an individual when they start off may have a noble motive, the end product is totalitarian, it's fascistic, it creates these terrorist groups, and it causes all these problems, and it's retarding for Muslim communities. It creates regressive politics and culture within Muslim communities. And so actually it's more than just, it's not a good idea. You actually have to do something more to combat it. And you actually have to explain this to the people who are involved in this or getting involved in these groups. Because when people start to get involved, it's much easier to engage with them and to put them off. When they are involved, it's much harder. And I think this is what it was for me, that actually it would have been, for someone to break it down, it would have taken a certain level of detailed understanding of that of the emotional, the political, the intellectual and the theological dimensions of that culture, so as to be able to relate to the different individuals. What were the push-pull factors for those individuals, and then break it down for those people accordingly. But the actual point of moving from just engaging with them to recognizing this is very, very problematic was, I guess there was a certain incident that took place. Was after I'd already left and I was talking to people, there's this thing which they have this internal question and answer. So they like to claim to encourage internal debate. You can ask the party any question and it will answer it. And so somebody posed a question to the party that the Prophet's life, many times whole communities came and said, we wish to embrace Islam, but we're not going to take part in the battles, or we're not going to give, we're unable to give the charity, or some individuals came and said, we're going to become Muslim, but we can't pray 5 times a day. It's a little bit, we're not going to do that. We might pray once, or we'll pray twice. And the Prophet was accepting of all of these people and communities and tribes and individuals. And it undermines this idea that you must enforce religion through state power. It undermines the idea of Sharia rules being enforced over people and punishing people for violating them. And it undermines the totalitarian nature and the non-compromising stance of Al-Qaeda and Hizb ut-Tahrir and Salafi Islam in general. And the question was posed, how do you square this up? How do you reconcile this? And the Hizb had a reconciliation, so that was special for the Prophet. Nobody else can do that today. The revelation is complete, we must take it all, etc., etc. Which was fine for me as, okay, that's your reconciliation, but you can see that's a subjective reconciliation. It's just an interpretation, it's not something set in stone. It's a human endeavour to try and reconcile the tradition with your ideology. But the problem was, what Hizb ut-Tahrir then went on to say was, and nobody has ever disagreed with this in history, and this has always been the case. And I could see that actually that was completely false, because I knew this, actually, historically many scholars had presented the alternative point of view from the early tradition to the later scholars to say, no, this just shows governance, and when you give your pledge of fealty to a government or to a caliph or a leader, he doesn't have to enforce all of Islamic regulation over society. And this was actually stated by one of the authorities which they were quoting, from the book they were quoting from. And they just completely lied and misled the people about this. And so what this demonstrated as well, the leadership was fundamentally corrupt, because it was happily prepared to mislead the masses of its shabab, of its youth and activists, who trusted the leadership. And so this is a kind of turning point for me to say, no, we need to publicly now attack its leadership for what it is. I think this was one of the things, growing up in Sheffield, one of the other things was that there was quite literally every single Muslim orientation. And when I was probably slightly older, 15, 16, I was attending circles by the Muslim Brotherhood, the Egyptian Islamist group. There was a Salafi, which is like a puritanical Saudi interpretation of religion, very much like puritanical fundamentalist religious interpretation, scriptural literalists. There was a Sufi circle that would happen every week. There was Hizb ut-Tahrir's weekly events. There were regular talks at the university. And so one of the things that I had was an element of lack of confidence and confusion. So actually there were all these different interpretations of religion that were presented to me. The reason I went with Hizb ut-Tahrir was the one that was most consistent, and is one that appeared at face value to be coherent with classical tradition, because they at least used the same language of classical tradition. They used to talk about the classical schools of thought, they used the same terminology